얘네 이런 거 맨날 3개씩 해, 등록금 때문에. 이게 승아 매력이긴 한데 아니 다 버리고 떠나자는 건 좀 너무하잖아. 그래서 얘기해줬지. 이 세상에 사랑 같은 건 없다. 그래서 나도 너 사랑한 적 없다.
승아가 죽었어. 네 아이야가 복수심에 아무 죄도 없는 어린애가 죽었다고.
했겠네. 이렇게 될 줄 알았어도 했겠다고요.
핸드폰 충전을 핑계로 여기 앉아 20분이 흐르는 동안 네 머릿속에서 일어나는 일들을 생각해봤어.
그랬더니요?
끔찍해.
좋은 사람이 되겠다고 약속해.
가르쳐줘.
So a couple of months ago, I posted a video about The Great Seducer called Romancing the Monster, in which I complained about the fact that the main male character, Kwon Shi-hyun, is a terrible person from the beginning of the show all the way to the end, but that he still gets a happy ending. Because he is a shitty person, as established in the beginning, but has no character arc to change that, and still, he lives through the climax of the story, despite his character equivalent dying in every other iteration of the story, including the source material, and then above even that, he gets a happy ending. I mentioned that this wasn't a problem constrained to this show, but more an issue that pervades romance plots in media everywhere, in which terrible men are rewarded for being terrible. That media will more often romanticize these terrible traits instead of portraying them as characteristics of a serial abuser or serial killer. So imagine my surprise and delight upon watching The Smile Has Left Your Eyes, the K-drama remake of a J-drama titled 100 Million Stars from the Sky. But the Korean version was really good at doing the things that I really wanted out of shows where the male lead is clearly dangerous, but the female lead is still attracted to him anyway. In the show, Yoo-jin Kang is a highly competent and rational character who sees all the signs and consistently refuses to be pulled in or pushed around by Kim Woo-young.
너 같은 인간 알아. 무례하고 마치 자기는 그래도 되는 것처럼 아무나 함부로 건드리고 다니면서 모든 여자가 자기를 좋아한다고 착각하지. 재수없어.
And the show does not pull its punches on presenting him as someone she should fear. Yeah, he's consistently framed as attractive, but that's part of what makes him so dangerous to the people around him, and the show is clearly aware of that as well, so it actually works here. And the show overall is just incredibly well handled. The acting is great across the board, particularly by the two leads who have repeatedly impressed me from earlier work and also have an overabundance of chemistry together. Even the scenes where they're just talking are extremely engrossing, and a large part of that is due to the acting. Another reason is because the script, editing, and cinematography are all top-notch as well. The show feels more like an extended movie than it does a television show, not just for the high quality and the fact that it just feels like it was more expensive to produce, but also because of certain details and nuances that fill out the show that don't usually appear in K-dramas, largely because less time is given to polishing them. Like the constant use of coloring to denote moods, ideas, or a sense of place. Most of the show has heavy blue undertones that get upgraded to overtones when characters are feeling particularly distraught, or how flashbacks are filled with saturated yellows to invoke a feeling of nostalgia. Also how the show associates the feeling of love with light, with consuming passionate love being juxtaposed with sunsets, and new fragile love being represented with the single light bulb of a lamp. Or how in the main character's first true conversation, where they're by themselves and sitting at a table with an umbrella, even though they're at the table together, they are constantly separated by the pole of the umbrella. Even in their individual shots, Kim Woo-young is locked into the left side of the frame, while Yoo-jin Kang is locked into the right. They may be looking and speaking directly to each other, but there is still something between them. And the audience's attention is brought back to this when the show goes out of its way, having Kim Woo-young literally drag Yoo-jin Kang to another table with an umbrella. I actually really hated this, I thought we were done with this bull. To have them finally take down their barriers. They don't use formalities anymore and are a lot more honest and open in this conversation, and as a result, the umbrella pole isn't separating them anymore, and they show up in each other's frames. There's just so much care put into creating this show, I kind of can't believe it even got made. It's just too good to exist in this world. That is, except for one glaring detail. Back in that video I made for The Great Seducer, I complained quite exasperatedly about the fact that Kwon Shi-hyun doesn't get a character arc, does not change, does not become a better person, but still gets a happy ending. I posited in the video that this was because it was something ingrained in patriarchal cultures, as it was incredibly common for stories to be used to teach young girls to learn to accept and love whoever they're being forced to marry, because the surly, cruel, and or much older man could secretly be a great guy, and a girl who's virtuous enough could bring that out. And if he isn't great, then a virtuous girl could cure him of the bad or something. And I still stand by that. And as I've alluded to before, the reason I can not only accept Kim Woo-young being terrible, but also enjoy that about his character where I couldn't do the same for Kwon Shi-hyun comes down to framing. In The Great Seducer, Kwon Shi-hyun is framed as not a good guy, but when he falls in love, he totally deserves a happy ending. We're supposed to be sad for him when things don't go his way, and then happy for him when they do. We see him being a terrible person, and then the show makes excuses for him, vindicates him, and romanticizes or trivializes the things he does. The framing is what ruins the show. Or, well, one of the major reasons the show wasn't good. Because, to be clear, it is not inherently bad from a story standpoint that Kwon Shi-hyun is a bad person. The main male character being a bad person who lies to and manipulates other people is just another way to create conflict and drama, which is, you know, why the character he's based off of in Les Liaisons Dangereuses is such a terrible person. He goes around doing terrible things, but he's interesting to watch because he's highly motivated, and there's something intoxicating about watching someone's self-annihilation through bad choices. And yeah, he does start to grow a conscience, but the story never goes easy on him. It doesn't give him a slap on the wrist and allow him to live happily ever after. Instead, he is confronted with the full weight of his actions, and he not only struggles to live with them, but it is heavily implied that he just can't. For the first half of The Smile Has Left Your Eyes, Kim Woo-young has been unambiguously framed as dangerous. He is a liar and manipulator and definitely belongs in prison for the role he played in that murder, just as much as Im Yuri does. He was an accessory to murder and he knew what he was doing. I really liked this show because it openly acknowledged nearly constantly that he is a no-good, very bad person, and that it would be best for everyone to stay away from him. But you also understand why everyone gets drawn to him. He is charismatic and good-looking, and like I said, the main actors have great chemistry. Watching them get closer feels like a lighter version of watching the show You. The main character of that show is also incredibly charismatic, and he actually hits a lot of the nice guy beats, so you sometimes find yourself rooting for him when things go his way before you suddenly remember that this guy is literally stalking this girl, stealing from her, breaking into her home, kidnapping people that get in his way, and killing them off as needed. The show plays around with framing and general expectations of a main character and is a play on the nice guy trope explicitly. And what makes You so great is that it sticks to this conceit, that the main guy is an irredeemable monster. He is never saved by love because his problem isn't that he wasn't loved in the right way, but that he's an obsessive, delusional, and violent person who poses a dangerous threat to anyone who crosses paths with him. I have a lot of respect for both the book and the TV show because they didn't, you know.
좋은 사람이 되겠다고 약속해.
가르쳐줘.
Now, I'm not saying that a redemption arc couldn't have worked here. I'm a sucker for redemption arcs like most people, and if I'm being completely honest, I am an even bigger sucker for the idea of love being the propellant for a redemption arc, even if I understand how completely and utterly problematic and wrong that setup is. The issue is that redemption arcs are hard to do well, even cutting out the for love crap that creators like to throw in for suckers like me. Creating a character who is believably bad, believably transition them from bad to good, and then present them as a believable good guy, all the while keeping this character feeling like the same person throughout, is an incredibly difficult task. It's one of those high risk, high rewards things that is so hard to pull off, but if it's done right, then that character will probably be a fan favorite and the best thing about that whole story. So the idea of Kim Woo-young having a redemption arc isn't inherently bad, especially because his starting point is so far past morally gray that he's actually pretty reprehensible. Him learning to become a better person and atoning for his actions would make for a really compelling story, but the creators are so disinterested in this transition that they basically just skip it. Kim Woo-young goes from evil mastermind to a pretty cool guy so fast. Not only does he feel like a different person, but it feels like a different show. Sure, he kind of struggles with Eugene Kang's older brother not approving of him, but that's about as far as the issues go, and that really doesn't have anything to do with him learning to be a better person. I mean, you could argue it makes him a little less selfish, but him worrying about his girlfriend's older brother liking him isn't so much a moral conundrum as it is incredibly banal.
너는 너고 그 사람은 그 사람이지.
너한테는 우리 오빠가 그냥 그 사람이야?
왜? 그럼 안 돼?
못됐어.
새삼스럽게.
It can be an interesting source of conflict, but really not the point here. But what would have worked would have been when he finds out that her older brother killed his dad, but there's no internal conflict over what to do. He just goes out to get a gun and tries to kill him. And the only reason he doesn't do that is because they're interrupted. He decides to do it, and that's it. You don't want to stop to question whether this is the right thing to do or just what you want to do. No pausing to reflect on your actions and thinking, yeah, maybe there is a better way to go about this. Nothing? In fact, after this scene,
가르쳐줘.
he loses all of the edge he had before. This one scene effectively declawed Kim Woo-young, almost going so far as to retcon his actions. The show tries to flip everything around so Yoo Jin-kook is a scary character, but he just doesn't pose the same kind of threat because he's not as smart or as emotionally detached as Kim Woo-young. While Kim Woo-young always felt like he was a few steps ahead of the brother, when the brother is the antagonist, he's mostly just a threat because it creates tension in the main romance. And when he does terrible things, it feels incredibly out of character for him and does not make a lot of sense considering why he doesn't want Kim Woo-young around Yoo Jin-kang, especially as the show goes on.
아니야. 누가 대체 진강이가 왜 네 동생이야?
The more you learn, the less sense it makes. And I don't care about his reasons from the original version because they don't exist here. So when this happens,
어떻게 오빠가 걔를 칼로 찔러?
그래 오빠가 잘못했어.
오빠가 잘못했어.
you didn't explain anything. You just acknowledged that it didn't make sense and then moved on. We're expected to just accept no explanation as an explanation? Apparently so, because neither of you are going to come back to this little tiny insignificant detail of Yoo Jin-kook stabbing Kim Woo-young. Alright then. And while I loved how distinct the show felt from other K-dramas with not only the care put into the production, but just how dark it was willing to get, letting the main character be a terrible person, the way it shows the rich as terrible people and does not glamorize them.
순서가 이상해.
뭐가?
언니, 나 승아야. 지금 아줌마 폰으로 문자해. 무영 씨한테 이것 좀 전해줘. 미안하단 말이 없잖아. 그 아줌마도 그래. 누군가를 때릴 거였으면 1번 자기 딸 승아, 2번 승아가 만나는 남자. 이상하잖아, 순서가.
After this scene, the show pretty much declaws itself. It deteriorates into a pretty run-of-the-mill K-drama with the way all the characters start behaving and the things they do. Kim Woo-young basically becomes a walking tragic backstory with a bland personality. Yoo Jin-kook is consumed by paranoia, and Yoo Jin-kang herself kind of falls to the wayside. Her connection to the main plot was pretty tenuous, only really existing to connect Yoo Jin-kook and Kim Woo-young together. And when she does that, and insta-fixes Kim Woo-young, only really seems to still exist in the story to force them back together yet again, and create tension until the ending, but it culminates in ways that feel forced and cliche and disappointing. And that's not even the worst part of the back half of the show. One thing that may seem nitpicky at first that really crawled around under my skin was the fact that Kim Woo-young has green blinds in his place. The show had made it very apparent up to that point that coloring was a big part of its storytelling process, so in these romantic moments when Kim Woo-young and Yoo Jin-kang are supposed to be all loving to each other, it's incredibly distracting to have these deep green blinds taking up the screen. And if you're confused on why the green upsets me, in film language, green is a color that denotes unease or the sense that something is off. It's why in W, a show that also makes great use of colors for its story, when Han Hyo-ju's character is arrested and in jail, and particularly during the interrogation scene, the background is so vividly green. Her being there is wrong, and the creators want the audience to be discomforted during these scenes, especially as Han Hyo-ju's character is being denied food and sleep. The green coloring just helps to amplify those feelings to the audience. Here though, it just doesn't make sense. These scenes are supposed to be sweet and endear the viewer to them as a couple before more crap starts happening to them, but the green just takes you out of the scene if you're paying attention to the coloring, and even if you're not, you'll probably still feel a little off about the scenes but just not know the reason. So why do this? Especially since later on when Kim Woo-young breaks up with Yoo Jin-kang, they are clearly working to incorporate as much of the green around his place as they can. It's obvious they know what green means in cinematic language. My best guess is the creators are using it as a foreshadowing to build up to the, twist they knew was coming farther on down the line. But it doesn't work because they start this up way too early, and it more than anything just serves to undermine the scenes themselves by either ruining the feeling or kicking the audience out of the flow of the story altogether. It's just really distracting. Though, not as distracting as when Chang Se-ran took over as the main antagonist of the show after Jang Woo-sung. Jang Woo-sun was never terribly well developed, but it also never particularly mattered because Kim Woo-young was the real main bad guy when Jang Woo-sun was around, and Jang Woo-sun more functioned as someone mildly threatening for Kim Woo-young to mess with before well and good setting him off. However, he was still way more developed than Jang Se-ran. She seemed to be being built as someone more threatening than Jang Woo-sun. The first couple of times you see her, she's just sitting back and enjoying the show, but you get the feeling that something is going to happen to make her snap, and everything will get much worse for the characters. It's a clear way to build tension. The creators of the show undermine this expectation by having her do not a damn thing. She kind of flits around a bit, making a vague threat here, an insult there. She stands in more as a representation of the dark side for Kim Woo-young in contrast to Yoo Jin-kang's the light side, more than she's an actual character. The most she does is give Woo-young some information and then a gun, and that's really it. She's incredibly flat and has almost no motivations. She seems to be evil simply for the sake of being evil.
저 비유 같은 거 없잖아요. 그쪽 마음인데.
맞아요. 내 마음. 모든 건 내 마음이고 결국엔 내 마음대로 될 거니까.
With Jang Woo-sun, he had more depth, and even if it wasn't much, it went a long way. Jang Woo-sun was an arrogant control freak whose actions were motivated by his pride and his need to possess Baek Sung-ah. Jang Se-ran seems to like it when people suffer, but doesn't appear to go out of her way to make that happen. Even when she vaguely tells Yoon Jin-kang about her brother and Kim Woo-young's dad, it's only because Yoon Jin-kang showed up to where Jang Se-ran works. And she does want Kim Woo-young, that's made obvious, but she doesn't really force him into anything. Like, she asks him to work for her so they can, like, hang out and be evil buddies together or something, and he's like, yeah. And she's like, cool. But then later he's like, nah, brah. And she's like, cool. And it's just kind of confusing as to why she's even in the show to begin with. I wonder if things fell apart with her character, and probably more story elements, because they didn't have the time to properly develop her before later episodes started airing. The discussion on how the show would end, whether or not it would stick with the original, makes me think that towards the end, a lot of hasty decisions were being made either as audience reaction was being gauged, or demands from higher-ups forced some changes. Either way, it shows. Also, now would be a good time for me to talk about the twist, because holy shit, motherfucking cocksucker, do I hate this twist! Now, this twist is honestly not that unheard of, but it's a plot element that I have always hated, and the last time I came across it, I started literally throwing things. I got so mad. Now, I kind of figured that it would be a fake-out twist because this is a Korean drama, and the creators of the adaptation had already softened the characters and the plot a bit to make it more palatable for the new intended audience. That being said, when the reveal that Kim Woo-young and Yoo Jin-kang were siblings, I was not happy. You know, disappointed but not surprised kind of mood. Especially because it is something you can put together pretty early on.
화상 처음 봐?
아니? 몰라. 엄마 같은 거 없어 봐서.
아빠는
없어.
언제?
어릴 때.
나도 부모님 안 계셔.
알아.
유진구, 유진강 제법 남매인 척 돌림자까지 썼더라고.
So, I had my suspicions that this information wasn't true, and was even less surprised when Jang Se-ran discredited this claim later on.
그 친구 유진강이 자기 동생인 줄 알더라? 진짜 자기 친동생.
네?
What I was surprised by was the fact that she did this halfway through the next episode, after the last one ended on the cliffhanger of this revelation. Like, seriously? Seriously? You're going to be edgy and use this trope, but not have the balls to stick with it, especially after spending multiple episodes building up to this? Come on. And I get that in the original the two actually were siblings and it wasn't a fake out, so the creators of the adaptation maybe kept it in either because they wanted to at least be respectful to the source material or pay homage, or maybe they just didn't have the time to come up with something else to move the plot along in the way they needed it to. But it really just doesn't work. Not even just because I deeply dislike this trope, but because it's so obvious this will be a twist, you actually expect it to be a fake out twist. At least I did. it also feels way too out of place in the context of the rest of the show, even if they were actually siblings. The original was much darker and much more twisted, and also came out back in 2002, when this twist might have not been as common. The remake, though, while it was dark and edgy for a K-drama, was not, surprise, our main couple are actually siblings, level of edgy. And that's fine by me. Clearly, I really loved the first half of the show. But with that change, needed to also come the change of leaving out a twist that A, isn't that shocking anymore and much more associated with soap operas than respected media, and B, doesn't fit in with the tone of the story anymore. Although, even before that got fixed, there was one other element that needed fixing that was so unequivocally bad that I nearly rage quit 30 minutes into the last episode when there was only an hour left of the whole series. Something so completely awful, so horrendously handled, that I kind of can't believe it was part of a professionally made show that aired on a respected national television network.
장남 장우상 전무에 이어 장녀 장세란 상무까지 두 자녀를 모두 잃은 장일건 회장은 비통한 표정을 감추지 못한 채
Who the fuck are you? Like, obviously I get what you are, but like, who the fuck are you? This is the first time we are being introduced to their father, and there is barely any, if any, mention of him throughout the show. We only really see him twice, and one of those times, don't even really see him, just his silhouette. And he doesn't even show up when the secretary shows up to kill Kim Woo-young and Yoo Jin-kang, and we'll get to those murders. But that's it. The story wraps up thanks to a character set up only in the thinnest of ways, barely an hour ago in the span of an over 16-hour story. Deus Ex Apogee, I guess. Because honestly, where was he when his son died? Jang Se-ran, who thought it was funny Jang Woo-sang died, actually showed up for his funeral. But where's his dad? And let's be real here, Jang Se-ran really seemed like she wanted to die too, which makes this whole thing even weirder. She starts taunting Moo-young to really hurt him, and she sees him going for the drawer that we all know has the gun in it. Did the creators expect us to forget that? Or believe that she forgot that? Because she just keeps going even after he's pulled the gun out. And then when he shoots her, she has no reaction at all.
그런 줄도 모르고 설마 니네 잤니? 어머, 진짜 잤어?
Cool. What is this bloodthirsty need for revenge? Where does it come from? Is he mad because he's lost his kids, or because this seriously inconveniences his business plans? Or something else we know nothing about and hasn't been set up at all? I repeat, who the f*** are you? And this really, really does not help the actual ending where the two die off. Kim Woo-young and Yoo Jin-kang's Japanese counterparts dying off works in the original, but in this version, what with Kim Woo-young being made into a substantially less reprehensible character, and the incest element being downgraded to a fake-out twist, it just doesn't fit well with the much lighter version of the show. Now, it probably could have actually been fine if handled well, but the creators shoot themselves in the foot over it before it even happens by having the father come out of nowhere to have them killed, making their deaths also feel out of nowhere, which makes this as an ending incredibly unsatisfying. It's not built up to, and it doesn't feel relevant on any level because we don't know this character, and there's really not much time to let the character death sink in for the audience. All the secrets are revealed, they get shot, the secretary just leaves them because bullet wound equals death, even if it's a bullet wound in the shoulder. You know what, he's just a secretary. Maybe this is his first assassination, I'll give him points for trying. They both confess their love and then die. Then the brother finds them and cries. The end. I feel like a lot of K-dramas have pretty abrupt endings, and this one is no different. Shows that end right after a tragic moment can work, but this isn't one of those instances. And it didn't have to be a disaster. I've avoided talking about the original Japanese version up to this point because for the most part throughout the beginning, this show did everything that an adaptation is supposed to do right. It was really good on its own, but it also remained faithful to the source material while at the same time elevating it, like how they make Baek Seung-ha an actually developed and complex character. Unfortunately though, not all of the changes were good, like how they softened Kim Woo-young. While Miwa does pretty much just fall into Ryo's lap, like Baek Seung-ha does with Kim Woo-young, we also see Ryo actively going out to look for Miwa after he heard about her.
네.
あ、ごめん。いや、鍵開いてたからさ。いや、これね、運べって言われたんだけど、どこに置いたらいいかなと思って。
誰ですか？
誰？いや、誰でもないです。ひょっとしてここのお嬢さん？
違います。
We kind of see Kim Woo-young do the same thing, but his intentions are much more ambiguous, which left the door open for the creators to rewrite history. At least Kim Woo-young's history. Because the girl murdered at the beginning of the show is not the only person he has killed.
私、柏木さん殺しちゃった。
Ryo doesn't just enter and leave churches whenever he feels like it, he leaves bodies behind wherever he goes. All in his quest to just feel something.
美和ちゃんがほんまに自分のことをかぼってくれたと思って遺書残して死んだんもそれも計算づくやな。
Changing the fundamental characteristics and character arc of the main character, whose motivations and actions are the main thrust of the story, cannot be done without fundamentally changing the point of the story. You cannot set up one story and then give the ending to another. Although, maybe I'm being too harsh. I read a review where the writers said they loved the whole show and thought the ending fit with it well, so maybe I'm just being a snob about it. I mean, I am kind of a snob, so it would make sense. The first half was just so incredible, so well crafted that these missteps are so much more infuriating here than they would be anywhere else. But I don't think I'm wrong in saying a lot of what made me mad were elements that were very badly handled, either of low quality or just not meshing with the tone of the story or world within it.
가르쳐줘.
And even though right after I finished the show I was furious, the farther out I get from it, the sadder I get. Not just because I was disappointed because my own enjoyment evaporated halfway through, not just because the show has so much potential to be incredible and then squandered it, but also because it's clear that all the way through the last scene, these actors were giving it their all. Honestly, there was a lot of talent and skill poured into creating this show from multiple different areas, not just the acting, and I have no idea what made the creators take such a sharp turn down such a bad road, but I feel just as bad for them as I do the audience. They were trying to make something great, something respectable, but something else got in the way of that. And what I think that thing was the idea that the story was about love saving people. Whether the original story really was about that, and whether it effectively pulled that off or not, doesn't matter, because it didn't work here at all. The show really starts to fall apart anytime it tries to show Yoon Jin Kang's love saving Kim Woo-young, because it's just not realistic. They don't show him changing, but pretend that he has changed in some ways anyway, so there's a lot that just isn't set up and certain important elements that just come out of nowhere or aren't earned at all. I really do feel like this scene single-handedly killed the show, not just because it's a story trope I don't like or because it's bad writing in this scene, but because the aftershocks of this bad writing are felt in nearly every following scene. It's subtle at first, but pervasive enough that by the end it caused enough damage that the wrap-up is caused by a character who is not set up. Only appears in 2 shots, one in which we can't even properly see their face, and they don't even actually close the story off themselves, but send someone else to do it for them. The creators of this show wanted to be better, but they only learned bad things.